Hey everyone, welcome to the PowerPoint review for Chapter 11, Developing Your Professional Presentation. Chapters 11 and 12 are the first introduction into some of the bigger picture ideas of the public speaking element of the class. And some of you who may have had a public speaking class, whether it be at DePaul or perhaps another university, maybe transferred in or maybe in high school, a lot of this might seem repetitive. But with Chapters 11 and 12, 11 specifically, we're trying to figure out how is it that we sort of go through the creation process and what is the mindset that we have to sort of put ourselves in to deliver the best possible presentation. Just a couple of quick prompts and ideas that you might want to think of. First and foremost, what are your feelings about public speaking? There's an old Jerry Seinfeld stand-up bit where he talks about the number one fear in life is public speaking, and the number two is death, meaning that people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy, okay? What we think about are the ideas of what are some of the things that may cause a person to be apprehensive about public speaking. And I just want you to sort of assess what it is that you think some of your strengths are as a speaker, not just a speaker in a big audience. I teach at DePaul lecture halls that are 125 people, and that circumstance is different, yet very similar in a lot of ways to teaching, let's say, an online course or just having these interpersonal relationships. So I just want you to think about some of the factors that come into play with you and the way that you present. But when we think about this, the idea of confidence comes in, and there's obviously a fine line between confidence and cockiness or arrogance. But the first idea is that we have to be able to manage our communication apprehension. The idea of communication apprehension is the notion that we actually have some sort of anxiety that comes with our individual presentation, right? So we think about our actual view of our speaking assignment, of our actual skill itself, our self-esteem, the adrenaline that just naturally physiologically kicks in when we're about to give a presentation. And I think a lot of people's initial reaction to the idea of apprehension is that it is necessarily a negative thing. And I think a lot of the physiological reactions, you start to sweat, you start to have your heart race and increase over time, you get a little bit nervous. All those actually can be used and harnessed in a very positive way. We just want to make sure that we are finding opportunities to actually channel that in a positive way. We want to make sure that the presentation that you make, the speeches that you make, not just in this class, but in life as we move forward, you're thinking about how it is that you can channel some of your individual assessment, right? Your anxiety, and make that into something that is a little bit more powerful. So once we start to understand or think about the contributing factors to our apprehensions, we think about how it is that we can potentially build this confidence. And the first one is really just a life rule, but we also see it within the textbook as well. But this idea of not procrastinating, a lot of times what we find is that we'll be able to wing it. Not just speeches, but wing things in life, tests, interpersonal relationships, job interviews, and once we get there and we don't have that preparation time, we see a lot of anxiety come through. But really this idea of knowing your audience is pretty critical, just because this is a business and professional communication course. The audience component of this really transcends just one particular assignment or even all of the assignments, because understanding your audience really helps to figure out what it is, how it is that I'm going to not only deliver the message, but what are the elements of the message that I'm going to construct, and how is it that I'm going to combine all those forces together, right? When you're delivering a presentation in front of a bunch of your colleagues, a bunch of students, it's very different than when you're pitching something to the CEO of a company, which is very different than when you're pitching yourself, like a presentation of qualifications, to someone who is in let's say a job interview setting. And a lot of this comes down to the visualization, right? Rehearsing these certain behaviors, but also the visualization that you are delivering, and you have this genuine belief that you can actually contribute and provide this successful speech. And ultimately, just like the physiological process, we can't control that. The thing that we can control, unless you're asthmatic, like I grew up as a kid, is this idea of breathing. Taking your time, using pauses strategically, recouping your thoughts, and then delivering it. I unfortunately have the tendency to ramble a little bit, as you might. Hopefully it doesn't leak too much into these PowerPoints, but I do have the tendency to ramble a little bit, and so sometimes I'll have to stop myself and go, relax, breathe. And you can use the same sort of tactic when you're actually giving a presentation or when you're in a job interview, right? Thinking about what it is that you're going to say, then saying it. I'd rather have a pause and for you to take 30 seconds to deliver something that is effective and useful, then take a minute to sort of beat around the bush and hopefully find your way as you're navigating through a lot of these conversations. Also, when I talked before, we want to channel this nervousness. We want to be able to look at this nervousness not necessarily as a detriment to us, but as something that says, hey, this is important. This is something that, I value. Otherwise, if I didn't value it, I wouldn't be apprehensive. If I didn't care about what people thought, if I didn't care about getting this job, I probably would just be able to, go through this, whatever, not much thought really into it. But trying to find the different pieces and the different places that you can look throughout this. And ultimately, it comes down to finding opportunities and preparation. A lot of this anxiety can be reduced through finding people, through practicing. And a lot of this should seem relatively straightforward because it is. A lot of the basic rules that we apply in life, of course, we can apply to public speaking. This idea of giving yourself a pep talk is particularly interesting. You might have someone in your life, whether it be a parent or a sibling or a significant other, maybe a friend, who gives you the confidence, who's able to give you criticism. And I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with, especially when we receive a grade back for this first presentation, is that after delivering it, we go through this quick self-assessment and we try to figure out, what did I do right, what did I do wrong? And it's very hard for us in a lot of circumstances, unless, we've had a long time preparing for this, it's very hard to receive negative feedback. So building up this confidence is pretty big. But revisiting an idea that we talked about before, the audience itself is actually pretty much the most critical component in a lot of ways. And we think about being audience-centered, and this sort of phrase is really focused on making decisions as to how it is that you're going to deliver a message, how you're going to construct a message before, and again, why? Why is it that we want to consider the audience? Ultimately, if you're in a job interview setting, the audience, the interviewer, is the one who is determining your fate. They're trying to assess what your goals are, if you're actually a good culture fit, if you meet all the prerequisite knowledge or experience or whatever it might be for that particular role. But ultimately, the component here that's very important is trying to consider what and how you should say something. And usually, when we go into, let's say, an interview setting, we have some semblance of what they'll talk about, and even some companies will provide us with information as to, okay, this is what we're going to talk about during the job interview. And so understanding those components and preparing for them allows us to actually think about the audience ahead of time. If we have LinkedIn and we figure out who it is that has been sending us emails, the recruiter, whoever it is, we want to prepare a little bit of knowledge about them. We want to know what they look like. The visualization component of this is sort of undervalued in a lot of ways, because if you can envision yourself communicating successfully with a person, the message sort of tacks on and follows suit. So once we're thinking about this idea of audience analysis, we're really trying to make sense of not just when and what our goals are, but who it is that the audience is and what can we cater to, right? And we think about the political nominations, we see a lot of different demographics that are being catered to, everything from just the person's age, their gender, where they're from, some sort of cultural background as well, but also the psychographics. What are the attributes? What do they believe in? What are the values? And when it comes from a business and professional communication standpoint, the value statements, the beliefs, the attitudes, the overall cultural fit in the company is really important for us. And it's really important for us to be able to articulate, sort of show and explain, and not just tell that we're a good fit. We could very easily say, we're going to be a great fit for X company. Why? Right? Why is it? Tell me. Be able to articulate what it is in your personality, in your background, in your experience, and your aspirations as a career. What makes you fit well within the structure of the actual organization? And think about the situation, right? What is it, the time and the place that makes it so that you can go ahead and actually pull through for this message and figure out the very specific audience that you're catering toward. You might be in an interview setting and you have 5 people that are interviewing you. And of the 5 people, one of them is going to be your direct supervisor. Not to say the other 4 are not important, but that one person is really supposed to be your specific targeted audience. Everyone there is important. We're not downplaying that at all. But we're thinking about how does it that we deliver the best message. So if, let's say you have 20 hours to prepare, you might not use all those 20 hours. A large portion of those hours are probably dedicated to that specific target audience. You want to qualify. Learn as much about the audience as possible, do a little bit of research, and sort of figure it out from there. And once we've done that, we're thinking about how it is that we look at the cues that they're presenting. So, presentations in a lot of ways, and a presentation of qualifications is sort of a one-way example of this. But all this is two-way, right? And because of that two-way interaction that we have, we want to think about how is it that we can play off of the cues that they're giving us, both verbal and nonverbal cues. You've probably had a conversation with someone who absolutely seems bored. They might start checking their phone. They might be looking other places. That gives us information. We get that same information from an interview setting, from conversations within the workplace. We want to be able to really over-prepare the bits of information and provide as much sort of stories, examples, stats, things that we've done before as a way to make sense of everything moving forward. But also we're thinking about, again, these nonverbal cues. What is it that they are telling us? Okay, there's a lot of things that happen in a face. I know that sounds weird. It's probably poorly worded. But we think about the different elements that happen. We have the eye contact. We have the facial expressions. We have the lips, the smile, the chin, the furrowed eyebrows. We have so many components that happen on the face, assuming that we have the ability to see the other person. Maybe a phone interview is a little bit different. But we can think about the actual verbal responsiveness of the individual too. How it is that they are responding to each and every message that we are trying to deliver and making sense of all of this. We're thinking about the movement. We want to make sure that everyone's sort of seated in place. If they start shuffling their stuff around, maybe going through their phone again, that might be telling of their actual interest in this particular situation. And in the same way, we're trying to figure out how is it that we reduce this boredom. If they are bored, do we shift gears? We've been telling a little bit about our background. Maybe we tell a funny story. Maybe we go for an opportunity to talk about a time that we struggled with work. Finding different pockets to actually fit a lot of our different insights and actual experiences is a good way. And of course, we have ways to sort of gauge retention, gauge the actual interest of the speakers. If they just don't seem to agree with what you're really presenting and the ideas that you're articulating, well, how do we get them to be on the same page? What is it that we need to do? What are the prompts? What are the triggers that we need to say to actually get them interested in what it is that we are presenting to them? And ultimately, if they disagree with us, there's only so much that we can provide before they kind of tune out for the day. A couple last ideas as I sort of wrap up Chapter 11. We want to think about not only just the sort of verbal and nonverbal responses, but we also want to think about the behavioral responses. Did the audience do what you had intended or wanted them to do? And this might sound a little bit coercive in a way, which I suppose it is, but if your goal in a setting is to deliver a message and make a case for a promotion, or your goal in a setting is to be able to convince an employer that you are the perfect fit for the internship or the job, or whatever the role is, are you accurately and effectively doing that? Are you delivering on what you came for? And if not, what else do you need to do? A lot of people have the tendency, and I think this is a negative tendency, and it makes sense in a lot of ways. We are vulnerable. We're putting ourselves out there. We're applying for tons and tons of jobs, especially coming out of college. And we're just hoping that something sticks, right? We're just kind of throwing things in the wind and hoping someone grabs a sheet and goes, oh, this person, they seem great. When we don't get a job, or we bomb an interview, our first case is just to go, okay, well, that's over, on to the next one. And that's fine to a point. It's sort of a natural defense mechanism. But we also want to think, in that moment, were there some cues that we could pick up and then evaluate how it is that we were delivering some of our messages? So when we brought up an example that we thought was great, it was a great illustration of how well we did at our first internship, and they kind of looked at us and rolled their eyes. Why did they do that? Now, it certainly could be the case that they're sort of pompous jerks, and if that's, you know, the people that you want to be working with, great, you're just going to have to deal with it. Or we can think about it from the perspective of what was it in my story? What was it with the delivery of that message that actually impacted them in a very specific way? And we think about this in terms of actually selecting and narrowing what it is that we're presenting. And a lot of this information is really pertinent to the very specific speeches and presentations that we'll give. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. But the idea is that we want to select the best possible topics that are of interest to you and the audience. What are the bits of information about your career, about your life, about your major choice that are really important for us to know? And this is something that in a lot of ways we get so hung up on things like GPA and being in an honor sorority or fraternity or society. And those are obviously pretty important things. We've probably dedicated a lot of time and money to those accolades. But is that all the people need to know about you? Because if you think about it, most of the people that are going to be in the top echelon of job interviews, right, in the applicant pool, most people are probably going to have very high GPA, either going or moving toward or actually have a degree from a prestigious university and are probably on the dean's list, right? So a lot of people already have those three criteria. Let's just assume they already have it. So with that, let's put that aside. What do you have? You know, there's sort of the Mr. Rogers approach. This might be an outdated reference for a lot of you just based on age alone. But Mr. Rogers had this sentiment that, you know, you will live a happy life if you just come to terms with that, the fact that you are the best you. No one else can be you. And some of that uniqueness positions us to actually have pretty compelling stories. The thing that I talk about most often in interview settings, whether it be an interviewer or an interviewee, is the fact that I come from a large family unit, and everything is sort of this collectivistic culture. And as a result of that, everything that I think about when it comes to coaching, when it comes to consultancy, is trying to figure out how is it that I help people feel as though they're part of a family. And I think that's something that really is telling about me and my background, but also the way that I view work, the way that I view team structures, and the way that I view company culture. That everything has to fit. We have to have great group cohesion. We have to make sure that everyone feels as though they're part of something that is more than themselves. Writing a press release is not the most glorified position, but writing a press release for someone who's going to put you in a position to succeed, in your manager, in your CEO, in your president or vice president, that's the big deal. Now, when we're just thinking about it from a day-to-day, task-to-task perspective, yeah, of course it's going to get monotonous. But if we think about building toward a bigger purpose, setting goals that we can meet, not only as an individual, but how am I contributing to a group, that helps us to make sense as to how it is that we're going to select and actually narrate the information that we're going to present. So a lot of this, of course, as you continue down Chapter 11, which we won't today, a lot of this will have to do with actual presentations themselves, but I want to talk about it sort of in a bigger picture as to how it is that we can use these insights about selecting topics and selecting specific bits of information and find a way to use that for our own purposes in the job interview setting or in really any business or professional setting that we find ourselves in. So that's sort of my pitch about Chapter 11. Hopefully, as you read a little bit further, it'll make sense in terms of public speaking. But I think these ideas sort of get us to a pretty good point for the purposes of our class. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. Otherwise, good luck reading this, and hopefully it coalesces with what you're trying to do.